Welcome to Debate the News True Crime. I'm Joseph Lobosco, and tonight I'm joined by my guest host, Heather Ford. Adrienne is at a podcast conference this week, so she will unfortunately not be joining us tonight.
In this episode, Joseph and I are going to be diving into the shocking international House of Prayer scandal surrounding its founder, Mike Bickle.
We'll be discussing sensitive topics, including allegations of sexual assault, which listeners may find disturbing. If you or someone you know needs support, help may be available via the Crisis Lifeline by dialing 988. Before we continue, a quick disclaimer. Heather and I are not attorneys, law enforcement officials, medical professionals, or forensic experts. We research each case thoroughly, but this show is recorded live with minimal editing. Any factual errors are unintentional. Any individuals, businesses, or organizations mentioned who have not been convicted of a crime are legally presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. The opinions of our guests and audience members are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of myself, Adrienne, or Debate the News. The International House of Prayer in Kansas City, IHOPKC, was founded in 1999 by Mike Bickle, a charismatic evangelical pastor who became a central figure in the modern prayer and prophetic movement. IHOPKC gained international influence through its 24/7 prayer model, ministry school, and global affiliates.
Bickle was widely viewed as a spiritual authority and father figure, a position that later became central to the allegations against him.
According to multiple independent investigations, allegations against Bickle span nearly 5 decades, beginning in the 1970s and continuing into the early years of IHOPKC. Multiple women later reported that Bickle used his spiritual authority to groom, manipulate, and sexually exploit them. The alleged conduct ranged from inappropriate sexual contact to coercion and rape. At least 2 victims were minors at the time of the alleged abuse. Survivors describe a consistent pattern. Bickle singled out younger women for mentorship, used prophetic or spiritual language to justify intimacy, and blurred boundaries between spiritual guidance and sexual behavior. The scandal became public in October 2023 when 3 former senior IHOPKC leaders, Dwayne Roberts, Brian Kim, and Wes Martin, came forward with allegations from multiple women. They stated the accounts were independent, credible, and showed a long-standing pattern of abuse. On October 28, 2023, IHOPKC announced that Bickle had been placed on leave from all ministry duties while the claims were reviewed. IHOPKC initially conducted an internal review that questioned the allegations and suggested the whistleblowers had improper motives. This response drew criticism from survivor advocates and outside observers, who argued the process lacked independence and transparency. On December 12, 2023, Bickle issued a public statement admitting to, quote, inappropriate behavior more than 20 years earlier, but denying the more serious allegations. On December 22, 2023, the organization announced it had permanently severed ties with Bickle, stating new information confirmed misconduct that disqualified him from ministry. The organization retained an outside law firm to conduct an internal investigation, while multiple senior leaders resigned in the following weeks. An IHOPKC commissioned investigation concluded that Bickle engaged in inappropriate sexual behavior, but was limited in scope after key victims declined to participate. And then the second investigation was a fully independent investigation commissioned by former IHOPKC leaders and conducted by Firefly, an outside firm, reviewed thousands of documents and conducted over 200 interviews. On February 3, 2025, the independent report was released publicly. Investigators concluded that Mike Bickle sexually abused or exploited at least 17 victims over nearly 5 decades. The report detailed grooming, coercion, spiritual manipulation, and a pattern of leadership failure that allowed abuse to continue unchecked. The investigation also found that IHOPKC leadership repeatedly mishandled reports of abuse, discouraged victims from reporting to law enforcement, and prioritized protecting the ministry over accountability.
Mike Bickle declined to participate in the investigation and has issued no public response to its findings.
Following the report, IHOPKC shut down its ministry school, restructured leadership, and pledged reforms. An independent pastoral review later ruled that Mike Bickle is permanently disqualified from pastoral ministry and recommended discipline for leaders who enabled or ignored the abuse. As we enter early 2026, the Mike Bickle scandal remains an open wound for many. Importantly, despite the mountain of allegations and the damning investigative findings, no criminal charges have been filed against Bickle to date. Law enforcement has not arrested him or announced any ongoing criminal investigation. One reason is the time frame of the abuses. Many of the alleged acts occurred decades ago, in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. In the state of Missouri, like many states, the statute of limitations for sexual offenses, especially those against adults, can bar prosecution of older cases. One alleged victim, Tammy Woods' decision to report her alleged abuse to police in 2024, 43 years after the fact, is powerfully symbolic, but it's unclear if it can lead to any legal action due to these time limits. In early 2025, survivors from IHOPKC were among those who testified in the Missouri State Legislature to advocate for ending the statute of limitations for child sexual abuse cases. And there's also the matter of evidence. Much of what Bickle is accused of involves one-on-one situations that occurred long ago, with little or no physical evidence remaining. Prosecutors would have to rely on witness testimony, which Bickle's defenders could challenge as unreliable or influenced by the lengthy passage of time. Additionally, it appears that some victims were discouraged from creating paper trails at the time of the incidents. For example, IHOPKC staff pressured victims not to contact police or even journal about the abuse, which further complicates any criminal case now. As of now, Mike Bickle maintains a low profile. He has not been seen in public ministry since 2023. Through a spokesperson, Bickle has generally declined media requests for comment on the investigations. He has not filed any defamation suits or formal rebuttals, but notably, he also has not outright confessed to the full scope of misconduct that the investigations allege.
The IHOPKC community continues to grapple with its aftermath. Some loyal followers still find it hard to reconcile the man they knew as a passionate prayer leader with a predator described in its reports.
Others have joined the chorus of advocates for change, insisting that transparency and accountability must become the new norm in church communities. In the end, the scandal's legacy may be measured in reforms and lessons. IHOPKC's willingness to undergo outside scrutiny, survivors finding their voice and each other, and potentially even changes in the laws, all aimed at preventing anything like this from ever happening again. The Mike Bickle case stands as a sobering example of how power, secrecy, and misplaced faith can enable abuse, and how, even without a courtroom verdict, a fallen leader can be judged by his peers and his community. All right, Heather, this case is horrible. We're talking decades of abuse, and it seems that as of right now, no one has technically been charged with it. You brought this case to my attention, you suggested it, you're very knowledgeable about it. What are your thoughts about this case?
I am unfortunately close to this case. Not that I had any interaction with this individual, but I have a dear friend who is one of the victims in this case. And that's how I learned about it. And I also have a close friend, as stated before the show started, that have her adult children unfortunately leading worship in this organization. This is something that's been going on for a very long time. And quite honestly, I'm disgusted with how it was handled. So many are defending him and protecting him. I'm not surprised. Honestly, I'm not surprised. I knew that there was something going on. It was just a matter of time before it came out. He's officially been stripped of all ministry duties, but that doesn't mean behind closed doors in his own home that he's doing something. It shows how corrupt the system is. It shows how corrupt this organization is. It shows how corrupt and disgusting it is with its followers supporting him and defending him. I absolutely believe all 17 victims. I support them and defend them. What was done to them is horrific, especially treating them like they're spiritual children, which is a term in the Pentecostal cults and churches. They use it as a way of drawing you in and preying on somebody who doesn't have a parental role. They will often say, "You're my spiritual daughter. I'm your spiritual parents, and this is what I'm advising you to do." So I can only imagine the pressure that these women are feeling of, like, I want to come forward, but I can't because I'm not going to be believed, just as was stated earlier. Or this was a spiritual father. I can't go against him. What do I do? And these victims, they wanna come forward, but they're like, "What do I do? I saw him as a spiritual father. This is like my dad. I don't want to do this, but I have to. It was wrong." So they're kinda dealing with, like, a battle in their head about it.
They conducted an internal investigation, but a lot of the alleged victims didn't even want to participate in that because, why would they want to participate in an investigation that's being backed by the very church that allowed them to be abused? What do you think about how International House of Prayer handled this? Do you think that they actually did that investigation because they wanted to know what happened? Or do you think maybe they were trying to protect themselves or a little bit of both?
They are covering their butt big time. Excuse my French, but they don't give a damn about the victims. They're doing this to cover Mike Bickle. That is the only reason why they investigate. They don't care. They don't care so much so they changed the name of the organization and they're keeping it a secret. They haven't even announced it yet, but they changed the name of the organization. This is what I have been trying to say for 7 years. These organizations don't give a crap about the victims. They care about covering their backside. They care about protecting the perpetrator 1000%. The things that some of these victims have told me about how they're being treated, it's disgusting. It is disgusting and it's heart-wrenching that these victims are being told that they need to repent for what they did. They didn't do anything wrong. Mike Bickle knows what he's doing. He absolutely knew what he was doing, and he knows what he's doing now. This is all a play because at the end of all of this, he's going to say, "Well, God has forgiven me." That is a load of bullcrap. And supposedly changes have been made within the organization. I find that hard to believe. In fact, I don't believe it. They don't want the newcomers knowing that there's an investigation, which is why the name of the organization has changed because they don't want anybody new coming in to find out that, like, oh, there's an investigation on sex crimes and sexual abuse. This is why pastors step down and leave. It's not because, well, we just feel called to go elsewhere. No, they're being told to step down because they did something.
And you bring up such an interesting point about saying he probably just repented and said that God forgave him. That's a phenomenon that I see in a lot of these church sexual abuse cases where the people who are the perpetrators act as if the real world doesn't exist and there aren't laws and real consequences for this behavior. They just say they're repenting to God. And okay, that's great if you want to do that, but you still committed a crime. So it doesn't matter whether you believed your God forgave you or not. You broke the law. You know what I mean? You're not above the law. So it's always interesting to me when these things happen and they launch an internal investigation. I realize that's probably the standard thing to do from like a legal liability standpoint. But if I had an organization and I was hearing claims like this, not only would I launch an internal investigation, I would go to the police. It doesn't seem like that happens all the time. And I find that mind boggling.
I have experience in this. My ex-husband was an associate pastor. He was caught by the church. It wasn't his first time. They sat him down and they pretty much gave him the option. They said he was going to go to jail or he was going to go get treatment. And they sent him off to a sex addiction treatment center in Deerfield, Kentucky. And part of the treatment center was he had to write a letter of all of his sins. In that letter, he literally did put in there that when he got caught, the middle school girls in 1998, after getting caught in 1996 with elementary school kids, he literally begged God to get him out of this, and that if God would get him out of this, he'd never do it again. And then he became an associate pastor, did it again. They like hide these things. They don't tell people about these things. They cover these things up. And they sit there and they'll say that it is in the name of God and that they're doing the best things for the church. And I actually talked to the girl from the church, and this was many years ago, and her and I had talked, and she was going to come forward, and because she could, I have the letter, she could come forward, we could get him, prosecuted. But then she stopped, and she stopped talking to me, and I believe the reason is because her father, I had talked to him probably about 2 years prior and asked him to come forward to get him charged and everything, and he wouldn't do it himself. And it's just absolutely crazy that these things go on and these churches cover this up, and then they go to the victims and they get inside the victims' heads and they convince the victims that, it's just in the best interest of the church to move on. And then these gentlemen who are doing these things, and women do them as well, but the majority of them are gentlemen, they sit there and they use the Bible and they use God and they say, He forgives me. And they brainwash these victims and they grow up and they're full of trauma and everything else. And it's just such a sad cycle to see happening because it does happen so often. But when the victims do come out and speak, people don't always believe them. And that's what keeps them from coming forward. And then when they finally do get brave enough to do it, that's when they get shut down. And it's really, really sad that this is really happening in a place that is supposed to be about God and God's supposed to be about love. And these people are not about that at all.
Yeah, and we unfortunately hear about this in so many different religious organizations. And I'm not anti-religion at all. Do whatever you want to do, but I'm just not from that world. It's very foreign to me. So when I hear about stuff like this, it's like very clear to me. This person abused a child. They need to be held accountable and put in jail. Like, period, end of story. I don't understand the rationalizations and all the crap that people do to try to spin these things.
A lot of times they look for these types of people, these individuals that feel lost or looking for some form of love. And then they get them in, they have kids with them, they raise the kids the same way, they groom them. And it's just an endless cycle and it's sad.
We also need to not just focus on what happened with the children, but also with the adult women. If you're a minor, you can't consent to this stuff. So it carries a different weight in both civil and in criminal court versus if you are over the age of 18. There's a different standard that can be applied to their individual circumstance, which is what we saw come out in the Catholic Church fallout that we still continue to see.
Yeah, and unfortunately, in a lot of these situations, it seems like the only real path to any kind of accountability is through the civil courts. Because of statute of limitations, it's very difficult a lot of the time to prosecute these cases. And even in situations where the statute of limitations has not expired, as we spoke about, a lot of these people are protected often and insulated. And it becomes a he said, she said. So even within those statute of limitations, it can still be really difficult to prosecute these cases.
So that's where you and I disagree. First time ever, right? If there was to become a criminal prosecution or even a civil case, it really isn't that difficult. And he said, she said, when there has been an independent investigation that proves that these allegations occurred. It took one Boy Scout, which is the current case that's going on, and that the Supreme Court just ruled on, that they are not exempt. So it's important to remember in these cases that a he said, she said situation is not the same when you have a large organization or a ministry putting pressure on you and you've got the members of that organization coming at you. It's very different than just somebody that you meet and they do something like this to you, or like workplace environment type situations.
So basically, what you're saying is if they do an independent investigation and they find that the abuse claims are valid and the organization takes the side of the victim, it's actually not that difficult to prosecute.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Look, a court can limit in a criminal case how many witnesses can come up and talk about what happened to them to bolster a claim or a case. A judge is going to weigh whether the testimony is probative or prohibitive in favor of the defendant. So in the Sean Diddy Combs case, there were supposed to be 3 people to come forward because the judge had limited how many of those that have since come forward or who had sued him prior to that could testify because it was going to become too prejudicial and take away from the specific acts that happened. But in this case, if one of the minors was to come forward and others that have come forward during this time of the 17, then that is more evidence to show whether or not this really happened. Like if a group of people are going to come forward all of a sudden and say, no, this is what he did, and it starts to become a pattern of almost identical behavior, then it would not be that difficult. But again, we're dealing with victims who then become survivors. And if you are a survivor and you then have to be brought back into a victim mentality to go to court, that can also be a very difficult situation to put yourself into because sometimes you have healed, sometimes you have not. But putting yourself back into a state where you can be labeled a victim and where the defense is going to come after you, like Heather said, in a way that is going to make you feel judged or make you feel that you're doing something wrong or that you're a sinner, can affect their recovery and their moving forward. So I think that also has an influence sometimes on who is going to be the first person to show up and
Yeah.
take the stand.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, just in my own personal case, when I first started talking to lawyers, I thought I was ready and I wasn't, and it backfired and it affected me greatly to the point where I was missing work and memories were coming up, flashbacks were coming up that I had blocked out, that I had just kind of just erased from my mind. I actually had I had a female lawyer laugh at me and shamed me for not coming forward when I was a child. That was it for me. That was it. So that's why I personally stopped seeking legal action for a while because I was like, no, I'm not dealing with this. Like, I'm not going to sit here and be gaslit and be victimized all over again.
Heather unfortunately had that unfortunate experience. What I can offer you is just that psychological part behind. People usually ask how it's possible that this thing has sat there for so long. The thing is that inside those groups, it often sits so long because one person becomes more than a leader. That one that becomes the center, becomes the voice, the mission, the meaning. And once that happens, protecting the person starts to feel like protecting God's work. Like protecting the brand starts to feel like protecting the community. And that's why, that silence that we have witnessed, it's not just fear, it's actually a structure. Because people learn that questioning creates trouble and that bringing concerns makes you the problem and that you are causing division, that you are hurting the work. So we are not talking about kids, even smart adults then start editing. themselves, right? And the part that makes really all of us uncomfortable is that unequal access and those blurred boundaries, the private world around the leader. And that is where that grooming style dynamics can exit in any high trust setting, because special access gets framed as an honor, as a mentorship, as a calling, and boundaries just do not break all at once, they just drift. One exception, then another, until the whole line is gone.
When an individual comes to, someone who you feel is supposed to be there to help you, or to other individuals, and you share your story with them and it's turned away or it's denied or it's picked apart, I mean, that does something to someone, because these things that happen to you leave a mark on your heart, your soul. And I hate to say it, in some way, shape, or form, you carry a little bit of shame of it. It's not justifiable, but it's just a natural human emotion. And when you walk to these people that are supposed to be there to protect you, and you tell them your story and you're not believed, or you're told that they can't do anything, psychologically, that does something to you. And when it starts with you psychologically, it turns into physically, and it causes so many issues and years of therapy to come through it. So, Heather, I think the fact that you're up here and that you're talking about it and that you're sharing goes to show a lot, especially since you're also advocating for it, how far you have come from that point in time where you initially had met with those lawyers.
Yeah, it was a joke. But I mean, to bring it back to International House of Prayer, I would imagine 100% that some of these women are going through the same thing.
I read an article where one of the victims stated that they felt that the independent investigation was a step in the right direction, but even that didn't fully capture the abuse that was going on.
Who ordered the independent investigation and who ordered the internal one?
So the internal investigation was ordered by International House of Prayer. The independent one was ordered by former leaders of International House of Prayer. They left and they banded together, and they actually were the ones behind the second investigation.
So Dwayne Roberts, Brian Kim, and Wes Martin, 3 former senior IHOPKC leaders, left, and they are the ones that came forward with allegations from multiple women. And they stated the accounts were independent, credible, and showed a longstanding pattern of abuse. And because of that, they then were able to get the ministry to put him on leave, and they hired a law firm to conduct the investigation. This all happened from October of 2023 until December 22nd, 2023.
And just to state for the record, as of December of 2025, it was made public that he has been stripped of all ministry duties. He is not allowed on the property, in the building, near any of it.
Well, that is good to hear. That's a step in the right direction. Should have happened decades ago, in my opinion. But Heather, do you have any other insight to these investigations or any pushback? Because me and Shaw are only going off of what was publicly reported in credible media, but you have a little bit more of an insider knowledge. So feel free to push back on us if what we're saying it doesn't align with what you're aware of.
No, it's all correct. I would say that as of recent, there are some other victims that came forward, and they're trying to figure out what they're going to do, if they're going to continue with legal action or not.
Yeah, that makes sense. And like Shaw said, it's very brave to even come forward and speak about this type of stuff, but it's a whole nother situation to have to potentially be re-traumatized, go under cross-examination. So I totally understand why people are apprehensive and aren't always ready to dive into that, because it's very difficult.
And it's also important to remind everybody that even though the independent investigation started on December 22nd, 2023, it was not concluded until February 3rd, 2025.
Exactly, so it is fairly recent. As I was researching this, I was trying to find as much information as I could, and there were some mainstream media outlets that had a couple short articles on this. This didn't get a ton of press, but in the religious communities, this was a huge story. The general public, most people hadn't heard of this. Why do you think this case didn't get that much mainstream attention?
A lot of this all came out in 2025. So now that the civil lawsuit has been filed, it's going to gain the notoriety. It's going to come to light because of that. But before that, there wasn't much to say. And people, as it has been reported, were reluctant to even come forward and say anything until those three men decided to get these 17 women to come forward and talk about it and showed the repeated pattern that Bickle did to them over possibly 50, 40, or 30 years ago.
If this goes back decades, and it took three men who were former associates of the church to go out and get an investigation started prior to everything else following it, there had to have been notification in that church. Like, they had to have known that this stuff was going on.
100%. There were people that knew, and it was hidden and it was not reported. People in the congregation knew it was going on. And this is why I say what I say. You want changes, you want community changes, you want changes in the church, changes in the Christian communities. It starts inside the church, it starts inside. There's not going to be any changes until people on the inside stand up and say, yo, I'm going to the cops, your butt's getting reported, and you're going to get investigated. It can't start from the outside. The change has to start on the inside. The reporting has to start on the inside. 100%.
And the investigation does back what Heather is saying. And the independent investigation did find that the IHOPKC leadership repeatedly mishandled reports of abuse, discouraged victims from reporting to law enforcement, and prioritized protecting the ministry over accountability. And this was a pattern of failed leadership that had occurred and gone unchecked for decades. And following this release of the report that was made public on February 3, 2025, they did shut down its ministry school, restructured leadership, and pledged reform. An independent pastoral review later ruled that Mike Bickle is permanently disqualified as a pastoral ministry. And they also recommended discipline for leaders who enabled or ignored the abuse. The action for trying to do the cover up is more than just a slap on the wrist. They're losing their careers, which is just one nail in the coffin. There's also so much more to come out. And hopefully, as this continues, these women will band together similar to the way the Epstein women have now, more and more of them are coming forward. They've created their community of survivorship. And then hopefully in this IHOPKC situation, they will do the same. And the more you have behind you, the more powerful you become and the more willing you are to step forward and file a lawsuit. And although Mike Bickle can't be criminally charged, he can be affected with a civil lawsuit, which probably is not something he wants because remember, there is a different level of findings. It has to be 51% of you is more probable than not that the action occurred, whereas in a criminal case, it's beyond a reasonable doubt.
In order for it to stop, it's got to, start being one, believed, and then taken to the right officials, and it has to be investigated appropriately and prosecuted. They can't keep forgiving these guys and using God as an excuse and forgiveness as an excuse to allow them to continue to abuse. I understand that an individual can change, but when you abuse a person like that, that's not really something that you can change. That's something that's deep buried inside of you. And if they are not held accountable, they're just going to continue to do it. And it takes a lot of courage and a lot of strength to go in front of people and talk about something so deep rooted inside of you. And so I would just encourage people that if you ever have someone coming to you, sit down and listen to them and just be there for them. But I do think that we need to believe people and that we definitely do need to start holding these individuals accountable.
And when it's your child, when it's your daughter, when it's your sister, you're going to be singing a different song, dancing a different dance.
These crimes are so hard for people to believe because, pastors, church, religion, teachers, all those different types of people are people that you grow to love, that you grow to trust, that they're an important figure in your life. And so when you hear these stories and individuals come out against them, I think like the human brain itself just doesn't want us to believe that these things or that someone is even capable of those things. Nonetheless, somebody that we trust and that we love and care about. And so that's where we have to start listening to people and listen to understand them, not just to hear them.
Jessica, you bring up a great point about believing people when they come forward. And Heather, you brought up a great point about you'll be singing a different tune if this happens to you or your loved one. And Heather actually has a chapter in her upcoming book called Not My Church, and it speaks to that exact idea. Heather, do you want to talk a little bit about your upcoming book and plug that for us?
Absolutely. So I have a book. It took me 2 years to write. And it is strictly about my sister and I escaping a religious cult. There's a good amount of chapters in there that are educational, which I felt was really important as far as what happened when I was there. So it is graphic. Some of it's graphic, I must warn you. And I do talk about suicide, foster care, and mental health. There's stories in there about my sister and I, just through our foster care experience and how we got into the system and then how we ended up into the cult organization and how we got out and kind of where I'm at now with it. So the ebook is already out. And I also want to go ahead and just say there's a discount on the ebook. I am doing a sale for $9.99 for anybody that wants to order it now for the $9.99. After that, it is increasing to $15 for the ebook. You're going to be able to buy it on Amazon. The name of the book is The Barbie Pink Walls That Kept My Secrets of Abuse. It is a memoir of spiritual, physical, and sexual abuse I went through within the walls of a religious cult.
And by the time this episode airs, the ebook will be available. And then on February 1st, there will be the release of a paperback and a hardcover edition. So definitely check that out. Barbie Pink Walls, you can search that on Amazon, Heather Ford. We will post a link in the show notes. And yeah, definitely, this is a must read. And I'm so proud of Heather. This is over a year in the making. She poured her heart and her soul into this book. It's raw, it's real, some of it is uncomfortable, but it is absolutely a phenomenal book.
I do know that it has been a labor of love, heartache, and probably really difficult, raw emotions that come forward when reliving something that made you a victim, but now you are a strong survivor. So thank you so much. From one woman to another who understands what you went through. I started in domestic violence as a prosecutor and then moved on to the police department as their attorney in sex crimes, and then moved out of that altogether. But throughout my entire career of 31 years, as of this June, I still do pro bono work through the DA's office for any victim or survivor going through a case. A lot of times, these victims who become survivors need to understand the step by steps. So I spend a lot of time doing that and working for no charge independently with these women and making sure they understand each of the steps, which can be very overwhelming in these cases, as Joseph pointed out, because these do become somewhat of a he said, she said. And you have to go in there very strong, and you have to have the conviction within yourself that the story you're telling is not fabricated. And the more that people work with each other, it will help you and it will help others to come forward. And we did find that out, especially with the Catholic Church domino effect, that the more and more people came forward, the more and more advocates came to help these people so that they could release their memories and get the help that they needed.
Yeah, absolutely, Shauna. So, Heather, any last words you want to say about this case or about your book or anything?
Yeah, I would just say be careful who you trust. And if any of you agree with what went down, then you seriously need to examine yourself. Again, it's everyone's lying until it's your daughter that's being raped or sexually abused by a pastor. You're going to be singing a different song. So it's just time to wake up. It's time to get with the program, so to speak. You have an obligation as a Christian, as a member of that community, any Christian community. You see it, you hear it, report it. Don't be a bystander, because that's going to make you just as guilty as if you committed the crime yourself. You have an obligation to stand and speak up for the victims. And once that starts, then maybe the victims will start coming back to the church.
Yeah, absolutely, Heather. And our first episode with Heather was Cults in America. So if you go to our Cults in America episode, Heather was a guest host and she delved deeper into a lot of these things, what to watch out for, what the red flags are. She delves deeper into her personal story. So definitely check out Cults in America. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to Debate the News True Crime on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever else you listen to podcasts. You can also join our live audience on the Chatter Social app to share your thoughts. You can catch our live show on Chatter Social every Tuesday and Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. Pacific Time. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and take care of yourselves and each other. Good night.